Trauma doesn't disappear in your 20s, it just goes quiet. And when life finally slows down, it comes back for its bill. This episode contains discussion of childhood trauma and abuse. Please listen with care.
Come on in and grab a seat. There's no better place to be. Two Midwestern Gen Xers emotionally stunted. Subtlety was not part of our upbringing. So here we are in all of our glory country crocs. I can't believe it's not better.
Hey Kendra, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Angela?
Uh, doing all right. It's quiet over here for now until I don't know, my birds, once I start talking, my birds start going nuts.
I did hear them.
And I'm always worried people can hear them in the background.
Well, it makes it sound like you're in a Zen garden, so it creates a good thing.
Yeah, Angela's house is the Zen garden over here today. How about you? If you got those dogs sequestered, are we going to hear them snoring?
Yeah, no. Justin's got them upstairs with him. I'm like, son, I'm doing a podcast today. You're home. Help me out here. And we have he's preoccupied too. We're getting ready for our son's game to start, and we're heavy duty baseball season right now.
Oh well, let's not waste any time. Let's get right into this.
Right on.
So Kendra and I were talking about different episode ideas we could go over, and an idea I had was let's talk about our roaring 20s, like this wild period in our life, where we're moving out of our childhood homes and kind of pivoting. Kendra and I had some similarities in our life path in our 20s, obviously some differences, where I joined the military. And I think today, the reason we want to explore this topic is because so many survivors I've talked to seem to kind of hit a brick wall in their 30s, and I don't know if that's the proverbial midlife crisis or what it is, because I used to view the midlife crisis as some sort of movies trope where it's like the guy divorcing his wife, getting a trading her in for a younger model, getting a sports car and spending money like crazy, and then the female midlife crisis being a slightly different version of that. But as I'm getting older and like hitting those crisis years that so many of my fellow trauma survivors talk about, I think it's interesting because, it's like all this trauma kind of comes to a head in your 30s and 40s. And to people who haven't been traumatized, they're a little surprised by that, like, why are you talking about it now? Like, or that happened 40 years ago. You've got a whole other life to deal with. Why is this an issue now? And so for our roaring 20s, Kendra and I want to talk about why trauma is kind of a sleeper agent in our young adulthood. Like it never actually goes anywhere. We just kind of build our lives up and around it. So Kendra, how did your 20s kick off? What did life look like for you when well, you talked a little bit about being kicked out of your house when you graduated. Do you want to kind of start from there and talk about, where life took a turn for you and maybe why some of this stuff, started lying dormant and didn't get talked about?
Yeah, it was like kicked out slash I was ready to go. They were growing up, in the environment, my mom's wonderful, but if you know her, she was like, just a very religious home, and which was great down the road. I'm glad she introduced me to God. But there was just things that you have two women in the same household, at that you're two adult women, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You butt heads. But anyhow, going into my 20s, it's funny because like our kids going into their 20s, they can't wait to be 21, because they'll get to sip a drink of alcohol. Thank God neither one of my kids really, they don't have that drive for that. But a lot of young kids you always can't wait to be 21. You can go to the bars, you can do this, you can do that. For me, like by the time I was like 20, 21, I was done. I partied, junior, senior year of high school, 18, 19. I mean, partied hard, snuck into the bars. And so I was done, and I knew I needed something more. in my 20s. I just didn't know what I needed. And I met my husband, at the age of 17. So we had partied together. We went through that phase of life together. So when you're going into the 20s, it's like we're ready to get married, have children, build a house. And we did. At 21, I was married. I got pregnant at 22 with our first child. And then with my second child, I was 26. And we built a home. And by the time we were 23 years old, we built a brand new home and we're living the American dream. And with that, you know, trauma gets put on the back burner of the mind. You're constantly trying to be a housewife, or if you're working outside of home, you're doing that. You're being a mom. You got all these events at school coming up that you're running your kids when they turn 5, and you're doing all these things, and it really puts trauma on the back burner. So it's almost like your 20s, it's great, and you hit the head on the nail. I remember
The
turning,
nail on the
I think it
head.
was, you hit the nail on the head when you said, like, going into your 30s, kind of like a midlife crisis, and I really agree with that. Because 20s, you're paused. You're so busy with young children, toddlers, that now, you hit 30, they're kind of growing up, they're doing their own thing, and you're having time to breathe. And when you have time to breathe, when you've been through any kind of trauma, it just floods in and hits back hard. So, like, my 30s was like, I remember, I think it was like 30, 31. It was just like, whoa, I haven't
The
dealt
year
with
before the
any
cancer.
year before the cancer. I haven't dealt with anything. And I made some poor choices, at the age of 31, 32, and I was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 32. But the 20s were, if you were to look at them and look at the photos, you're like, "Oh, man, that's just great."
They
But
were
you're
fun.
really they were fun. You were a family, you're doing all this stuff, but then, it catches up, and that's what's crazy is people got to have to remember, it does catch up. Um, I'm
Well,
gonna go ahead.
you were talking a little bit about, like having kids and your focus being elsewhere and not really dealing with that trauma. And, I'm interested because for me, it's not like, and, so I just want clarification from you and, so our listeners can relate. I think what I'm hearing, is that maybe you're not making a conscious decision to ignore the trauma. You're not like seeing the trauma in your head and saying like, "No, like I got other stuff to deal with." Like it doesn't get thought about at all, so the kids are never an excuse. The husband's never an excuse for not dealing with
No,
the
no,
trauma.
no.
Because for me, it's like it's almost like it evaporated or but it
It
didn't, like
Yeah,
it
it's
did,
like,
but it didn't.
yeah, that's what I meant with putting it on the back burner. You're
Yeah,
putting it
okay.
it's on the back burner of your mind. It's still there. It's just not at the forefront because your mind is kept busy with everything that's going on. It was a weird thing. I got in a conversation with my mom about this not too long ago because she was saying, my daughter just recently got married. She's 22 years old, and she made the comment, and she said, "They're not as mature as you and Justin are, her and her husband." And I said, "That's not
Well,
true."
thank goodness.
Right. Well, I said, "That's not true." I said, "That's what children look like that haven't gone through the hell that we went through." My daughter and my son were allowed to be kids. Yes, they had some trauma with going through my cancer, and that was hard for them, but they were still, I gave them, and I know you did too, and still are because you have younger children than I do.
I could have done a lot better with that, but
You
thank you.
could have done a lot better, but you know what? You were a good mom for what the tools that you had. You know, when our oldest, because you have two older ones that match the age of my two oldest ones, and those kids were brought into a situation where, uh, you know, we're coming off of our teens, we're coming out of a hellhole, and we're trying to be the best version that we possibly can be. And I wish, I've told my daughter this before. I wish I could go back with the version I am now and be her parent. But at the same time, this conversation with my mom, saying that they're immature compared to us. And I said, no, they're not. They were allowed a childhood. They were. they were allowed, we did the best we could, but they were allowed a better childhood than we had. And that's what children should be at their age. That's the way they should think at their age. You know, you and and I'm sure you're going to talk about your 20s, but we grew up fast because we had no choice. We had no
Right.
choice. We were given adult feelings at a very young age and dealing with adult headspace that we should have never been introduced to. And, that bothered me is like, no, our kids aren't immature. You know, our kids are making mistakes that normal kids make. They're living their college lives, they made decisions in college. You know,
We
I'm
all did.
yeah, we all did, but I'm proud of them for being their age, getting to be a kid, getting to make these crazy life decisions. We really didn't have a choice. It was either stay or go, and we had to go. So let's hear about your 20s.
Well, I mentioned previously that I moved out of the house when I was 18. So I pretty much moved right out, moved down the road, had my own place, and I was going to college for a couple years. Um, at one point, I had 3 jobs, and I was just bound and determined not to live at home. And I was working in South Carolina and had a roommate and was waiting tables. That was the primary source of my income. And my roommate had a party one night and I had a Maxwell House coffee can. That was the bank. That was my bank in 2000. Like you're waiting tables, you have all this cash all the time. You're not running to the bank every day. So I was a little overdue for my deposit and I had a Maxwell House coffee can full of rent and bill money. And, during this party, one of my roommate's guests jacked the can. And I called my mom up upset, I didn't have a means to pay my rent or bills for the next month. I called her up crying and said I needed some help. And so her solution was to get in the car, drive down. She was living in a different state at this point. So she drove 12 hours in her car, packed up all my stuff in the middle of the night, like basically made me abandon my car that I was making payments on, like, abandon my car in the car lot, take all my stuff with her. I didn't have a choice. She came and she was like, "You want my help? You're coming with me." So oh gosh. Oh, if I could we always talk about, if you could go back in time and, like, what would you tell your younger self? Like, Kendra, I would go back to, like, South Carolina, the year 2000, say, like, "Don't get in that car with your mother." But,
Bet you did.
but I did. So she took me back, to a home I had never lived in before. She and my dad, he had taken a new job in a different state. Built the house out there that you visited, and she moved me in there with her, and we lived there for a couple months, and my dad was on a work trip, and one day we were arguing. I don't know what we were they're like, This is just gonna be the thing." I don't know what we were arguing about. Like, I was arguing with my mother, and she gave me an ultimatum, and she said, "I'm either kicking you out of the house or you're gonna join the military." And, in hindsight, that wasn't really an either/or kinda scenario because, like, both of them entailed, like, me, like, not living in her home anymore. And so, like my mom took me down to the recruiter and, it was like 3 days later, I was shipped off to boot camp. Like, it happened fast. And what I'm thinking about now, what I'm thinking about this story is how embarrassed I am because, I was 20 years old, almost 21. And, I tell people, like, my mom made me join the military, and it's only just now dawning on me, Kendra, like, I didn't have to join the military, like, I'm 20 years old, I coulda done what but that's just goes to show, like, my mom told me I had to so I was like, "Well, shit," like, my mom told me, like, I have to join the military, so I'm
That's
joining the
mental
military.
abuse.
Like,
That is mental abuse.
whatever my mom told and it's still, like, whatever my mom tells me to do, like, that's what I do. But, yeah, so I joined the military, And, I don't wanna talk about the experience too much today, it'll be revisited, in another topic, but, having come out of a hotbed of trauma, I was ill-equipped to enter, a military lifestyle, and I did endure, um, several counts of, sexual harassment, abuse, and assault. That is where I'm 100% PTSD through the Veterans Administration for military sexual trauma. But I ended up getting out of the military in my early 20s and, got married, had my first kid. Um, I wanted to be a stay at home mother. So my husband at the time was very supportive of my staying home. And so that's what I did for 4 years. It was happy. It was happy, like, I had my 2nd daughter, like you said, in pretty quick succession to the first one, and, I spent a lot of my 20s just, going to college, working on my bachelor's degree, and master's degree. I did it from home so I could work around my kids' schedule, and around military deployment schedules just to be able to accommodate my family's needs, and, I was thinking about that too, about, like, my 20s and that sleeper agent trauma, like, why wasn't I thinking about this stuff from my childhood, like, it should have been fresh in my memory, right? Like, that would have been the time to process it. Like, no, like, why would I? Like, my 20s were fun, like, all this stuff from our teens that weren't fun, like the strict parents, the abusive parents. Like now we're young and we have money and we have husbands that like to do the same things we like to do. So we would go out to eat, we would go to concerts, we would do stuff with the kids, and it was fun, and I think, like, that's what I wanted to focus on for most of my 20s is how fun it could be, and I'm in
Absolutely.
I'm interested 'cause, some of the things I did in my 20s, I think were actually due to, like, trauma responses, and I didn't realize it before, and, yeah, I was thinking about it for you a little bit 'cause, we talk about some of our trauma responses, like, fight or flight, freeze or fawn, and, sometimes it shows up as, like, anxiety and, like, OCD and perfectionism, and I thought to myself, like, "That's Kindred to a T," do you think you were doing that in your 20s when you were momming it up and, like, people not even realize that that's a trauma response and, just saying like, "Oh god, Kendra's such a good mom," because I mean, that's what I heard all the time.
Yeah, you just the mom part came naturally just because I my kids will tell you I was probably over helicopterish. I still it's terrible. I got to work on it, but I am backing off a little bit. The helicopter parenting came from what I went through, so I never wanted them. I was very picky where they went, who watched them. I only basically allowed my mom. And then my home, I've always been, even when I lived at home, I was a neat freak. My CDs, or even like we'll go far back as tape cassettes. If I don't know if anybody, younger than 30 knows what those are, but they were these really cool things you put in the thing. Okay, yeah, I won't go into that. But actually, I will, because remember when the thing would eat it, the boombox would eat it, and you'd have to take a pen or a pencil
You, like,
and,
rewind
like,
it.
rewind it. Yeah, yeah, I miss those. I think our kids need that. We need to bring tape cassettes back. They need to know how hard life really was. But, I would organize my tape cassettes and my CDs, and just my clothes have to be, from in color coded, and like t-shirts, sweaters, and I had carpet in my home at the time. We've remodeled, so now we have wood flooring, but I had to have lines, and the lines had to be perfect. And one of our cousins actually, when he would visit, he always teased and made fun of because how perfect the lines in my carpet are. And it would make me freak out if somebody walked across the carpet and messed up those lines. Um, so yeah, there's those things that come from that, and you don't realize it, that you're carrying it through to your 20s from your childhood trauma. And to be honest with you, I'm still that way. Everything's got a home in my house, and it cannot go in a different place. There's a way to load the dishwasher, there's a way that you hang up clothes and fold clothes. And I've accepted it now. I don't look at it as, a disabling mental issue. I look at it as this is what brings me peace and contentment and helps me to, it's a coping mechanism. Is exactly what it is. And so I do. I look at these things as yes, they were trauma caused by trauma, but now I've turned them into, it's just like somebody that goes, we were talking about a Zen garden. There's people that go and rake sand. That's my sand, is my OCDness. And my anxiety, it's great today. I still have trigger points like we talked about last time, but I know them and can sense it. And that's what happens, and we'll have to talk about our 30s in an episode, because the 30s is what, the most, when you come down off your 20s and you enter your 30s with all of this hitting you, that's when it gets really bad. Because it's like the 20s are your break period. So you got your childhood trauma, you got your crazy teen years that for you were still trauma, and me mentally. And then we get thrown into our 20s. And like you said, it's happy. It's great. You got a partner, you got beautiful kids. I mean, I'm not brag, but our kids are beautiful. And we just have good genes, I guess. But we have
You get
beautiful
into like some
kids.
Sydney Sweeney like controversy over here. Like Kendra and Angela have good genes.
Our kids are good. They're beautiful children, and all of them,
Smart and precocious and
very
funny. Oh my gosh.
gosh, yeah. And I know they're not going to admit it, but they get that from us, and they do. And I mean, we'll never hear that, so be prepared never to hear that. But
Kendra,
no, so you,
I think you're smart and funny and beautiful.
I think you are as well. That's why
Oh,
our
thank you.
kids are. So no, our 20s were just a 20s were a nice break. I look at that, and the 20s were, some of I mean, the best things in my life happened in my 20s, my husband and my children. So the 20s were a beautiful break. But there are habits that you carry over. For me, it was, my OCDness and but my anxiety was out of control. And I'm not ashamed to say it. I was on, um, they had me on a medication. I was on it for a long time, just to help me, to when my chest tightened up, and I didn't realize how to handle those triggers at the time in my 20s. So I did fly off the handle sometimes, and for that, those times I regret. And that's why I've talked to my daughter and my son about, is if I could go back, with the knowledge I have now, it would be even better. They would have had an even better childhood.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify on something I said just because I've been thinking about it and, my wheels got spinning. But, I know I talked about like my 20s kind of starting off with trauma, and then I talked about how happy I was, and, I just wanted to bridge that gap a little bit if that was confusing anybody. Um, Coming out of the military, that was kind of that trauma was minimized for me, when I presented it, for action and review, nothing was done, and, I had to continue to work under those conditions, and so, when I separated, I didn't look at it as trauma for a long time. I looked at it as a past, that I should regret. I took it more as a mark against myself, like I had been promiscuous maybe, or acting in a way, unbefitting of a lady, and and so it was something that was minimized for me, and then I minimized it myself. And I worked actively in my 20s to, dispel any kind of image or anything that came from that. So uh y- y- you know, I didn't address it at all, and so that's what I realized, like, the 20s are trauma kinda becomes a bone pile in your yard, right? Like, if the childhood trauma, if you bury that like your poor dog Fido back in the yard under the tree, like, your childhood trauma gets buried first. Well, now I've got, like, this early 20s trauma, like Fifi gets buried on top of Fido, and you basically, as these decades go on, like you've got new stratuses of trauma, and the problem with that The problem with this bone pile of trauma in your yard is that a couple different things happened. Like the older trauma, like the stuff at the bottom gets really heavy or like condensed, because all this stuff's piling on top of it. It gets condensed, and so it's harder to access. It's harder to remember. Like things are getting fuzzy, and then there's almost like an erosion, details get stripped away or corrupted, when you have all these different traumas back there. And then, the other thing is that, like, all these bones kinda start fusing together, and so, like, you can't tell when you're hurting, like, which pain is from which trauma because, like, everything's all fused together in this bone pile in your yard.
Well, I'll tell you what, you said like the bone pile and how in your 20s, it was kind of like I'm gonna say blurry with our trauma was blurry. And I do remember our conversations, some of them through, our 20s. We never talked about any of this. It was never discussed. We talked about kids, we talked about music. When you guys came and visited, there was never a discussion about this. It was, life. We talked about life. And I think it was nice. It was a nice period and a nice mental break, I can only say for me, because I had carried up until my 20s, I knew everything, carried it. And I then our 20s hit, it was kind of a nice and I really the only sad part about my 20s with us was I didn't know it until now, because we're talking about it right now, is that break and stuff. I thought I would, you would never be able to talk about it because we didn't talk about it until your 30s. I think it was your late 30s we started talking about this.
Right.
Um, so it was good. Like I was happy for you, great, great. And then I'm not, and that, but at that same time, I was wondering, am I crazy? And I know that's your trigger word. I'm sorry to use it, but that's what I thought about myself. I was just like, am I not okay? Am I remembering a different past? And like you said, it gets blurry. And so then it's not that you forget what happened, but it's almost like, you don't remember the parts that, and your
Right.
brain gets foggy. I don't know.
'Cause, well, yeah, we talked previously about triggers and identifying your triggers and stuff. In your 20s, for us, being young wives, young mothers, I was in a transient military community. You're still around the family. So, like, we have different kind of pressures around us. I don't know that one had it better than the other, but, like we were hustling.
Yeah, you're right. We were hustling in our 20s. We were trying to, it was almost we were trying to prove a point.
They were trying to prove to each other,
Yeah,
when we talk about our moms, like, being competitive and how much was it them being competitive and how much were they just trying to show each other they were okay? Like, "Look at me, I'm
absolutely.
okay. Look at me.
Yeah.
No, I'm okay." Like, they both I
Yeah.
think they both wanted to be okay to some extent.
Yeah, and I think that though, in our 20s, we were trying to prove a point to our family, to people that we wanted to hear, wanted them to hear. We wanted to prove like all these rumors that had gone on about you or about me. And we just wanted to prove that, look at us. We're these rock stars, we're wives, we're moms, we have nice houses, we have nice lives, we travel, we do this, we do that. And, I look back at it now and I really do. I think we were trying to prove something, especially to our family, because our family is huge on comparison. They always have been, not just with Angela and I, but with all of us, like this cousin didn't do this or this cousin did this. It's just constant comparison. And I think for you and I, and if I'm not speaking well of you, let me know. But we were out to prove something, to prove that, we are good people. We are, we're going to be these great moms, these great wives, and, we're going to live these, elite lives. I think that's what I mean, I really do. I think we were out to prove something.
Well, I mean, I was so insecure as a teenager, my mom used to say, like, just the most awful shit to me, when I was 16, she looked me square in the face. She was like, "You can't cook, you can't clean. Uh, I hope you're good in bed or no man's ever gonna want you." It so, like, what a terrible thing to say. That same
Right.
year, she got rid of her wedding dress. She made a big deal out of saving her wedding dress. Oh, yeah, maybe you didn't know this. She had her wedding dress in a box under the bed, and every once in a while, she'd take it out. She'd have us try it on and twirl around. She'd take pictures of us in her wedding dress. Well, when I was 16, she pulled it out of the box and held it up, and she's like, "Well, I guess it's time to get rid of this thing because you're never gonna fit into it." So I was
Oh my
like,
gosh.
"Yeah."
Yeah, you
I was
know,
not fat at
you
16, I'll
were
tell
not fat. You were very you were perfect for your height and everything. So, yeah, I
you.
that goes back to my theory and folks, it is my theory. This is not Angela's theory, this is Kendra's theory. It goes back to my theory that Angela's mother was jealous of her. Listening to some of these stories, I remember a lot of them, but knowing what happened behind closed doors when I wasn't there as well, it like kind of proves my point. And it makes me sad because I could never imagine being jealous of my daughter. My goal in life, and I know it is your goal because you talk about your girls and your son all the time about, you know, we want them to excel. We want to be the platform that they stand on. We want to be the shoulders that they stand on. We are literally always talking about our kids and how we could propel them and how we could help them become better people, and succeed in life if given the chance. I have never once out of either of our mouths said, you know what, so and so. I'm not going to say our kids' names, but our this child, I wish that I could, I would have done it better than she did, and blah blah blah. What? That is craziness to me that a parent can be jealous of their child. Crazy.
I mean, there's things my kids could do really well that I wish I could do, and maybe I am a little jealous of that sometimes, but not in a way, where
Not
I
in that,
wish
not in the
ill.
way your mom was. No,
No, they are
absolutely not.
my good. They're also bright and awesome. It's humbling sometimes just being in their presence.
I have to.
Uh,
I do pinch myself sometimes, as good as our kids are.
but what I was thinking about earlier, I was talking about just being immersed in momhood and wifehood and being busy with life. And, we discussed previously the importance of identifying triggers and stuff. And I wonder, if that made it harder in our 20s to identify the triggers because you got toddlers running around, you're
Right?
cleaning, you're doing all your domestic chores, so, like, when stuff from our past, like, would flag and show up, like, nobody was able to say, like, "Oh, shoot, you have unresolved childhood trauma." They're like, "Welcome to being a mom," or, like, "Welcome to the terrible twos," or whatever, So, it's like everything gets a mask over it, not to say, like, the kids, like, caused any trauma or but, no, it's just things were happening that were getting attributed to normal everyday struggles, like parenthood or college or playing house and, like, just never examining, those bones underneath.
Absolutely, I agree. I absolutely agree. And for our kids, you know, I'm sure they look back at, and if they can remember, I like you and I can't remember a lot past certain ages because we blocked out a lot. But if our kids can look back at that time when you and I were in our 20s, and I wish they could, well, I hope they do, compared to who you and I are today, that, that's inspiring to them. If they are struggling with something, I don't know. My
Do you
my
know how
kids are.
different you are?
Oh, I do. I know how different I am. I know how different you are. you know, we're different.
Well,
It's a
it's weird
night and
because I
day.
don't feel different, people say you're different. I'm like, I'm not different, like, I
No,
like
not
all the same
different.
shit,
Yeah, you
like,
don't
stuff's
lose who
still
you.
funny,
Yeah, you're always going to be who you are in every phase of your life. There is, that's why I like these people that do crazy crimes and stuff. And people are like, oh, let's rehabilitate them. No, you are who you are through every season. It is. you just become better and you become more seasoned in that season, if that makes sense. So, like for us, mentally, we are better. We are able to, and I hope that's what I want our kids to see, or if they do. I don't know if they pay attention to us that much or not. They're kids. Well, they're mine. I have two adults now, but I hope they can see. And I know my daughter has said that stuff. She's like, and so is my son. You're not the same as you were then. You were a good mom, but my son actually told me this the other day. He's like, but you are a better mom now. You were a good mom, but you're a better mom now. And I had to sit back and think like, what? I cleaned your diaper. I cleaned your room. What do you mean I'm a better mom than now? And he says, no, you're better because of just I don't get frustrated as easy. I don't get because those kids pick up their sponges. They pick up on everything. So even like you said, the terrible toddler, the terrible twos, we may have, I don't know about you, but I can speak for myself. There were times where I just flew off the handle or, I never beat my kids, but I just couldn't control an emotion at a moment. And now that I'm able to, and it was nice to hear that from him that he noticed the work I've put in. And, as an adult, and I hope that inspires our kids, all of our kids. Like, yes, we were good moms, but we could have done better. And we recognize that. And that's what I don't want to lose in this conversation is that our 20s were great, but and we were great parents. No, we're not saying we were great parents. We're saying we could have done better, but that was a phase in our life of trauma where like it was a bag of bones at the bottom or it was put on the back burner. There were still things that were not healed. We were unhealed young people raising children. And I'm not giving an excuse for anything that you and I've done as parents because, for the most part, I do think we were good parents. And we did shield our kids from a lot and we did helicopter and we loved them deeply. Um, but I do love the versions of us now. Yes, you still like the music that you listened to then. Yes, you still like doing the hobbies that you did then. Ditto here. But the person I am today compared to the person I was in my 20s is very different on a mental standpoint, as a mature standpoint. And I'm proud of that. I'm very proud that you and I, and when we get to the discussion, and maybe that'll be our next podcast, is the 30s. Because the 30s were rough. They were the
Oh
rough
gosh.
patch. They were the rough patch. So yeah, so we're warming you guys up in this podcast land. We're warming you up for, yes, it sounds great in our 20s that we're talking positive about, but the crash comes at 30s. And I know a lot of people will relate to that. Your 20s are good if you start a young family and then you turn 30 and it just crashes. You crash mentally, you crash physically, you just crash because kids are growing up. Distractions are becoming less.
Well, I wonder, I got my bachelor's degree when I was 24. Um, and I got my master's when I was 29. And I was raising my two oldest at the time. And I'm wondering, like, how much of the schooling kinda helped me dissociate. We talked about being immersed in books when I was a kid, just reading thousands and thousands of books, and, that's kinda how I separated myself in my mind from the trauma, and I kinda think I was inadvertently doing that in my 20s, kinda immersing myself in my studies, and, you know me, like, I'm a perfectionist with my studies. I had a 4.0 grade point average, like, I had to have 100% in all those classes, and I did. Um, Although I would be remiss not to point out that I got a B plus for my first class in my MBA, so I only graduated with a 3.9. So, like, I wanna be on record as not
Ooh,
not
39.
well, like, I don't want people to think that, like, I was completely perfect, 'cause I was not. But, I really strived for it, and, it's I think that served a couple purposes, like, one, the immersion in the studies was, a venue for dissociation for me, but also it was a form of validation too, right? Like, I'm used to not getting validation from my parents or, the people around me, but getting a big red shiny A, on my paper, that was pretty validating for me, like, that was my dopamine hit, so, like, I was always trying to, like, ring that bell, like, "Can I have another,
It
please, please, please?"
and that's crazy. I mean, you were sitting there raising kids while doing that. So where was there time for any thought of anything, you know? So I think you're absolutely right on that. You were really immersed in school, you were immersed in motherhood, you're immersed in wifehood, and doing all that, that is distraction. That is, I mean, where were you able to even I can't believe you could still come up for air and all of that. But as far as validation goes, I don't know if you ever heard this, but I'm gonna hear it now. You were validated, just not to your face,
Oh,
because
man.
yeah, and I don't want you to, if anything you get out of this, our conversation today is take some of that validation. They always, grandma, grandpa, aunts and uncles, my mom included, and even your parents, they validated on how well you were doing. And it was constantly talked about and how well your schooling was going. And it wasn't done in a way of like sarcasm or anything. It was genuine, like, look what she's doing. Wow. So I'm going to tell you, you were validated. I wish they would have did it to your face.
I wish I didn't seek it so hard from everybody, and I think that has been the biggest struggle of my adult life that started in my 20s and went into my 30s, that intense need for validation, and so, what I wanted to ask you is if you felt like in your 20s, maybe you were moved out of your mom's house, you were removed from our childhood environment, did you find yourself, like, kinda putting people in roles that were now vacant? Like replacing, like, mother figures and, like all these
Oh,
family
yes.
archetypes? 'Cause, I picked go ahead and answer, yeah, because I have some questions.
Yes. Yes, I did, and I still did, up until, 40. All my, I always had close friends my age, of course, but, like, I'd always have a way older friend, and I
Yes.
was and it was weird because they were, like, my best.
She's like your life guru. You always have that
Yeah,
one
my
friend
life
that's like
guru.
15 years older.
Yeah, 15, 20 years older than you, and, you know people would always be like, "Why do you hang out with," but I found, it was the relationship that I was craving from a mother, didn't realize it. I just thought I liked old people. And, I remember being friends with, an
You
older
smell like
person.
Ben Gay all the time.
No, yeah, I had one that did, but, I remember being friends with an older woman who actually, had a son the same age as me, and, she was, I mean, my best friend, and, I didn't realize it at the time, what I was, and I think she took it that way too, kind of, after a while, but I didn't realize I was looking to her. She was my advice person. I would go to how you would go to a parent. I would go to
Right.
her. And, it just I noticed that a lot. And I actually enjoyed hanging out with her more than I enjoyed hanging out with people our age. Because people our age were just like, yeah, you couldn't talk to them. You couldn't voice what you were going through at the moment. You felt protected in conversation. So yeah, I did replace people. I replaced, like, my dad with my father-in-law. My dad was not around and until later in life. And so when I got married, I replaced and put, yes, he's my father-in-law, but he became, you know, and he still is to this day. Like, if I really need, like, a father figure advice or something, I'll call him and be like, "Hey, you know, what would you do here?" Or, "Hey, can I have help with this?" So you replace people. How about you? Who did you replace and with who?
Well, I mean, I feel like for the most part, I was surrounding myself with friends that this is this is gonna sound like crazy. Like my mother, and I know that you just said that, you found a motherly, friend, but I placed people in my life, where they were meeting the wickets I needed for stimulation. Like, I didn't see that I was trying to be BFFs with my mom because, these women were very smart. They were fun. They were interesting. They liked to do the same stuff I did. So, they seemed more like me. Like these women are just like me, and they seem like best friend material, and they're so fun to hang out with. But also they're just a little bit judgmental and never give their seal of approval. And no matter how much I chase it, I will never get it. And in order to avoid fights, it's easier to just acquiesce to what they want to do. And then, like, the moment I
Right.
put my foot down and, like, I want to do something, like, now I'm the bitch because I have an opinion. I was surrounded myself with people like that.
I
And
I did too. I agree, I did too.
like, it took me 20 years to figure that out, like, "Shit," like, I kept trying to be best friends with my mom, and, like, this is why they drove me nuts because, like, they were never gonna validate me, and,
No. Well, you're they're in the end of the day, they're not our moms, we're not their daughters, and, and then that realization hits, and that's why those relationships dissolve, because we didn't realize we did that, and I don't blame the people that were older that I was friends with. I don't blame them, I blame myself because I tried to look for that, like you said, we'll call it validation. I looked for that validation, or I looked for that advice or that approval, and you kind of sometimes go with the flow because they are older, so you do go with the flow, and because you don't want to lose that because you've already lost yours, so you don't want to lose that, so you go with the flow until you just something like it's off balance. It's not a good balance,
well, it's
if
funny
that makes
because
sense.
it does, like, you talk about me being a people pleaser all the time, and I
You
I
are.
am a and I know I am a people pleaser, but I think that needs to be explained what that looks like to because, people who don't know me that well might say, like, "Are you friggin' nuts? Like, you're not a people pleaser, like, you're a bitch." And here's the thing, like, you people please, you people like, you do it, and then you have a breaking point, and then you're like, "No,
Yes.
no more. Fuck off. No more."
Yes.
So, like that's the like, to explain that dichotomy a little bit, yes, like, you can still be a bitchy
People
appearing
pleaser.
people pleaser.
But yeah, like when I look at people pleasing, I look at people and I will say I'm way, way better at not doing it is like because you know in the workforce you'll see a lot of people pleasing going on, or if people that are just in certain circles of your life, it's like they're yes men. I cannot stand yes men. I like to hear no every once in a while. And that's what will, and you're not. I don't think
Well,
you're a
this is
yes
from
person.
Jimmy, like
Yeah,
Ji
you're not a yes person like I used to be. Like, I remember when we were kids, I ruled the roost when we were playing outside and stuff. It was gonna be what I wanted to do, get with my younger cousin. And you're like, "Yes,
which would
okay."
usually be like, "Let your Doberman chase me," or "Let your
Or the
goat
goat.
chase me." Oh my god, like, Kendra's goat was so friggin' scary. It's
It
like,
wasn't though. He just didn't
she's
like
like,
people.
she's like,
I remember when we were kids, do you remember, you know, when it was like tall grass? I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and we couldn't mow the whole property. So we let the grass get real tall. And then you and I would go and we would like pat down like a circle of grass. It was like our fortress, like our home. And we collect caterpillars. We had like
yeah,
a million caterpillars. I don't know what we did with them. We didn't kill them or anything. We released them, but we didn't bring them in the house or nothing in case my
well,
mom ever listens to this.
we had that caterpillar wedding one day. We each had a
Yeah.
like, you had the bride and I had the groom, and we said our caterpillar vows.
But I loved it. I mean, there were good moments in our childhood. I want people to know there are good moments. In every abuse situation, there are glimmers of light. And that for me was one of them, was when we would, we play on the farm or we climb that one tree. There's like a tree right outside the side door of the house, and you went straight out by the barn, and it was the only one we could climb because it was short. We would climb that too. I mean, there were some good times. Yeah, so, the filling the roles thing, I agree with you, and I really think it had similar I have a very similar view as you, you know? You just and maybe I was a people pleaser too and didn't know it because I did go along with the flow. But I was a people pleaser to certain people, you know? I never like people my own age, no, I started with the F off right away.
Like, almost like you had your circle of trust, right? Like, JB was your
Yeah,
circle of trust, and
yeah. And the older people were the only ones I allowed into the circle of trust. Like, I'm still friends, with one of them. She lives out of state now and stuff, and she's not much older than me. She's like 5 years older than me, but, she helped me a lot through, the end of my probably like the beginning of my middle of my 30s. We'll go with middle of my 30s. She helped me a lot, and, occasionally once in a while, I'll say hi and talk to her, but our lives have just gone different directions. But if you are out there listening and you have replaced people in your lives with roles of like a mom or a dad, I want you to take into consideration that remind you they are not your parents. And, those friendships can sizzle really quick if you are looking for validation from them or if you are wanting that approval of things or the advice, that you think parents should give. So you have to remember their role and if you want those friendships to continue.
well, because that's kinda unfair to other people too, right? Like, putting those expectations on them,
Absolutely.
like, they didn't sign up to be your mom, so, like, you have
Yep.
no I would have no reason to be mad at somebody for, not loving me like a mom should, 'cause,
Yeah.
like, this girl's my age, it's not her job.
No, and that's what we create though. You create that and that's what fizzles those relationships. And it's not their fault. Like, I like my friend that I was telling you about, it's not their fault. And I remember them telling me one time too, I feel like you're putting me on a pedestal. And I wasn't putting them on a pedestal. I was placing them, like you said, I was replacing what was empty in my life. And that's why we have to, and I talk to you about this all the time. I search for happiness in myself now. I don't seek it outside just because of situations like this, because at the end of the day, we're all human. We're going to get hurt. So you have to find a place in your life where you can say, okay, I've got to create this. I've got to fill this empty space myself. Whether it's picking up an extra hobby, whether it's picking up doing something fun for yourself, going to a concert, going out to eat, going to watch a movie by yourself. But you got to find and replace these things. We can't use people because the more you use people, the more those people are going to let you down. And it's not their fault. It's because you're putting an expectation on them that, first of all, number one, they're not aware of the expectation you're wanting. They're not aware that you're replacing an emptiness or a void in your life. They're generally trying to be your friend, you know?
It's a little hard to hear listening back, like, it's true, and I've messed that up, and,
Me too.
but, one of my good friends that Kendra, yeah, I was crying to her one day about, the dissolution of a couple of relationships in my life, and, she said to me, she was like, "Angela, like, some friends are only meant to come into your life for a season," and I've really carried that, and, so I've tried not to, like, lament the dissolution of a relationship or be angry about it, and rather just, like, focus on what I got out of it for the time that I had it, and, like, that's been very therapeutic for me,
I like
you know
that. I like that a
Yeah.
lot.
And, listeners, if we're talking about the stages of grief, like, one of the stages of grief is like the bargaining phase, like where you ask yourself, like, what if, what could I have done differently? Like, what, it help you get through that a whole lot faster, if you just realize, some friendships aren't designed, to last for your whole life. Sometimes it's just for a season. And if you reframe that and think about, the beginning, middle, and end of that season and what they brought to you, even if it was just companionship, like while you needed it in that season, then hopefully you can reconcile that loss a lot more easily and realize like it wasn't a loss. It was just never meant to be like a permanent thing.
I like that a lot. I think that's great, and I would like to if you're good, I like to end on that and pray us out. That was really good.
All right, let's do it.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys, by the way. Dear Heavenly Father, today we lift up every person who feels weary in their healing, for those who thought they were further along, for those discouraged by old feelings resurfacing, for those wondering if they'll ever truly be free. Meet them right where they are. When progress feels slow and setbacks feel loud, remind them that healing is not a straight line. Remind them that a hard day does not erase the growth of yesterday. What feels like being stuck is often strength being built beneath the surface. Lord, when they are tempted to quit, whisper hope. When they are tired of revisiting painful places, give them courage to take one more step. When doubt says it's always going to be this way, speak truth that says this is not the end of your story. Help them see the ways they have already grown, the boundaries they now set, the awareness they now have, the compassion they're learning to give themselves. Let them trust that even in the slow seasons, you are working. Bring light to the dark corners that still ache. Surround them with safe support. Remind them that healing takes time and time does not mean failure. What was learned in survival can be unlearned in safety. And most of all, plant deep within them the steady assurance it gets better. Joy will feel natural again. Peace will feel steady. The weight they carry now will not always feel this heavy. Give them endurance, give them gentleness within themselves, give them hope that refuses to give up. We trust you, we're faithful to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.